And we are live. Welcome to another episode of the New York Information Security Meetup. And I have the great pleasure to introduce Dr. Rebecca Wynn, who is a global CISO and CPO. I'm so excited. This is a second part in the series because we didn't get a chance to talk enough the first time around. And there were a couple of topics we wanted to unravel. So first of all, how are you? Thanks very much for joining, Dr. Wynn.
Oh, I'm doing great. And I'm happy to be back with you guys as many times as you guys want. I love being here with you all.
Yeah, and the feedback was awesome. I think people really like the way you describe, existing issues and how do you just call it like it is. You definitely don't mince words sometimes when it comes to unraveling some of these mysteries around cybersecurity. So why don't we jump in? And maybe just a quick intro for people that didn't see the first session. Just about yourself, about your background, what do you currently do? How do you help your clients and so on?
Oh, well, I'm Dr. Rebecca Wynn. I am a global CISO, trust officer, chief privacy officer. Currently, I do a lot of vCISO, fractional CISO, and cybersecurity strategy work with investment firms. That's also with hedge funds, investors, healthcare companies, global companies. I think there was like 24 different companies that I was doing vCISO work last year. So that's what I do. I'm on a lot of advisory boards, such as CyberWired, Cyber Security Ed is an example, HMG. And I also have a podcast that's rolling out, Soulful CXO. So stay tuned, watch that. That's under the Information Security Media Group.
Awesome. Highly recommend. And as soon as you have that on air, I'll be happy to share with my group as well, Dr. Wynn. So why don't we jump in? But before we do that, let me ask you this question. So you're super qualified. You could probably get like an awesome position, working for single enterprise, but yet you prefer to consult with a bunch of companies and be this virtual CISO. What do you like about doing that as opposed to get like a great role somewhere?
Well, it's not that I wouldn't necessarily take a great role somewhere, but I'll tell you a lot of times when you do, and I've had global 150 companies talking to me last year, but a lot of times they really want one-dimensional, and I'm really a hybrid. I'm very technical, but very strategic, but I can roll up my sleeves and get dirty if I need to get dirty as well, too. And then I also enjoy being very much so speaking with clients, dealing with legal and privacy. So it's really those ones saying that I'm a great hybrid, and that's a great asset to this company versus just trying to pigeonhole me into like one drawer in your house and keep me in that one drawer. The companies who want me in that one drawer, it's never going to be good for them, and it's never going to be good for me because I have to be able to use all my facets. So it's really finding those. And generally, those end up being more of the startups or the ones that are more companies that are, 250 million, maybe to 500 million, got to 700 to 1,100 employees, where they do need you like, hey, you need to jump on this client call. Is this legal, make sense? And then they allow you to do those different facets. So it's more just finding the right fit, not that I wouldn't be opposed to the right fit.
Yeah, interesting. And it sounds to me also that your day is very exciting. You get pulled into a bunch of different issues that you can solve or provide some insight. And then you have the liberty to, pick and choose your clients because it's a two-way street, right? And then also, you can cross-pollinate because you are, issues that you see with one company are, it's not always, even despite the fact that they may be in different sectors, they still, I guess, have similar challenges. Is that a correct statement?
Yeah, it is. And then one thing is you get to be a better ripple effect around the world. I get people at times to say, hey, but this other person has been with this one company for 15 years. And are they then better qualified than somebody who's maybe been with several different companies? I think if you've been with many companies and seen many different sectors, you have a better perspective, and you've seen many different people in the workforce than somebody who's only been pigeonholed with one company, who's had one way of doing things and hasn't been able to expand to see different various ways of doing things. So I also think that those of us who do what I do, consult and then work with a lot of companies, we have a better perspective. And we also get to see more ways that work and don't work versus maybe somebody who's only worked for one company for their whole career.
Yeah, it's also interesting, to see that trend, it looks like there's a lot of CISOs that were they had a quote unquote traditional full time job, and then they moved to to become a virtual CISO for for several different companies. Do you find that trend to to continue? Is that diminishing? Do you find do you ever mingle with other VCSOs and talk about the experience and so on, and then maybe talk about what a typical engagement looks like for you when you come in and chat with them beginning. I'm assuming that you get called in for an issue, and then that turns into a longer engagement.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's really good about it is a lot of us realize going into 2019, 2020 is how burnt out we've been because, there's no sleeping really for a CISO. CIOs, CTOs, a lot of times they have a bigger workforce that works for them than we do. So a lot of times we have to be that security architect engineer as well too, or at least be able to look at it as well as the strategy. But when we come in as being cybersecurity strategists and maybe be CISOs, we come more about we are the expert in the room. And so one of the things is I would tell you a lot of times it's easier to go ahead and define the product, define what the project is that we need to deliver, and then what resources the company is going to need to be able to deliver that efficiently and not be the sweat, the tears of Rebecca having to spend 100-hour work weeks to get her done. And so for us, it gives us better resiliency as a person, better balance as a person. So that's the one thing when I've talked to people is like, we realized how much in 2020 our lives have gotten out of whack by pulling so many hours. And then when we were at home, I would tell you, I was absolutely 24/7, 7 days a week, no lie, busting my butt for a company with no really personal rewards back to me. It's just like deliver without even a thank you at times. When you're consulting, you get thanked and you can actually manage your life a lot better.
Interesting. And maybe that's kind of a follow up to, there's this whole notion of the Great Resignation, right? I don't know how real that is, or if it's what's the impact on cybersecurity, specifically in cybersecurity professionals. Do you find as a burnout, or people are looking to change roles when going back to work or potentially going back to the office?
Yeah, I noticed that, I do mentor a lot of people as well too. So if you mentor, have questions, just reach out to me on LinkedIn. So one of the things I tell people is do a Venn diagram. What is it that you really love? A lot of times we look at it only one dimensional. We'll look at it only from a work perspective, but you really need to look at it, spiritually, physically, and stuff along those lines. Because if you're not resilient to yourself, I'll tell you, the company will just say, sorry, then they'll say next, right? If something happens to you, they'll support you with healthcare and all that kind of stuff. But at some point, they'll say next. So I tell people, find out what those really loves are. And it's interesting. There's been studies out there, and I usually use this as an interview question. If you, regardless what you did in the world, you would make $70,000 a year. You have to work, but no matter what job you have, President of the United States, comparative working at fast food restaurant, nothing negative about that. But you would make $70,000. That is it. What would you do? What would you do? What would be your love? Mine would still be doing what I do today. But if you're not, life is too short. People always say you spend about 90,000 hours doing your work in your life. I think I probably spend more 150,000 hours. But if you're going to do that, to have that constant struggle and not being fulfilled in your soul and being a positive ripple effect, life is too short. So if you think about it from that perspective, then that's what you need to do. Maybe that is being an analyst. Maybe that is being in network architecture. Maybe if you're, you want to be in human resources IS department. Maybe you find out that you like doing photography and you want to be a photographer. I said, do it. You will be more happy in your life if you do that than if you go ahead and you're just trying to follow the dollar only, because your quality of life after 70,000 really is just, bigger choice.
Yeah, and I think that the pandemic caused the kind of the realization that work-life balance matters more than before. At least just my sense of it. And you're right; it's a perfect example. Like, ask yourself that question. And I think the 70,000 mark, I guess it depends on what country you're in. So you can probably go do quite well with less than that, depending on where you reside. So let's talk a bit about your some of your your engagements. What does it look like when you first engage with a client? and they don't know you. First of all, like I'm assuming again, it's a lot of word of mouth. People know you, or you get, it's not like something that you advertise and people reach out to you because they have a referral, somebody internal, they already know you. Is that a correct statement?
Yes, people see me on LinkedIn. I do have a website, drrebeccawynn.com, where they can kind of see what's out there. But it's a lot of my published work, a lot of my writing. Like you said, a lot of people who've worked with me before in the past, and they know that you get her done. And so that's how it is initially that way. And then I would say that the biggest challenge is always, what does you want? What does you want? That's not even a sentence, but what do you want? Because one of the things is like, we want everything. Well, time is finite. So I think that's one of the always challenges is like, we want a cybersecurity strategy, but what do you mean by that? What is the expectations? So you can make sure that what you are doing and what are you delivering for them meets that requirement. So make sure that if you are doing something like this, that the statement of work is very clear once it's deliverable. And I would also say that for me, because being the CISO as well as the strategist, things happen. And so one of the things I'm always cautious writing is like, if those things happen, I will totally help you with them. But then you can't go ahead and hold me fully accountable that something else that you wanted that we couldn't deliver in the time frame, because literally, you had a ransomware attack and it bricked your company, and I had to go run on that with you there. Well, time marches on to that other project, right? So you can't. I'm not going to be doing then 80 or 100-hour work weeks if you're not paying me only for 40-hour work weeks. So that's one thing I said, be very careful on that is in knowing those positions, things can waive. And just make sure that you have the flexibility that this is a pause because we're going to do this and then come back to it, but keep making sure you get paid and you don't get docked because you didn't deliver the project on time. So that's one thing I always cautious people on.
And how do you find that alignment? It sounds like so important to align in what you can offer in your consulting style with the company. And I'm assuming it also has something to do with the level of maturity.
Mm-hmm.
How many times they've done these type of engagements, and maybe the history of that company with cybersecurity and so on, right?
Yeah, it does. And I would say one of the things is a lot of times, especially from cyber strategists, they don't know what they don't know. So they also want you to educate them on where they should be. I would tell people also be conscious of if you have to speak to 30 different people and you have to please 30 different people, that's really tough. So I try to narrow down who it is that actually is I'm going to be speaking with on the project, and then how we determine success in that project. Because if you have 30 people in the room, 30 people are never going to be satisfied. But the other thing is too, is I also tell people, be conscious how they speak to you. I recently had a partnership I was speaking with, and they kept talking about, really, even for me, they kept calling me pedigree light, regardless of all the work I did. But for me, there was already an arrogance that way. And
what does that mean?
Guess maybe because I worked with Northwestern Mutual as a Fortune 100 company, but I didn't work with 3 or 4, so I'm pedigree light.
I mean, like from an experience perspective.
Yeah. So if it's like, well, you didn't go to Yale or Harvard and that's going to be a knock against you, regardless what you do, just walk away. That's why I just said, it's not a good relationship for either one of us, because we're not going to look at the body of work which can be delivered, and you're only going to look because someone didn't go to Yale or Harvard. Walk away. So don't be afraid to walk away. There's other companies out there that need you, who will respect what you do for them. And the other thing I would just say is, if you find a company who's not ethical, you find that they get everything set for PCI compliance, and the very next day they unroll everything they did because they think they have that piece of paper in their hand. I'm very cautious of that. I also look and see, you have someone who has a lot of legal cases against them. So I walk away from those. I don't do business with them because I don't want to get in that kind of trouble.
Yeah, well, that makes total sense. So first of all, it kind of leads me to 2-part question. One is, how do you find out in advance? It's because there's no when you get a renter, right, you do like a background check on them, right? And there's ways that there's firms that do that. There isn't such a thing, unless you do your own research to uncover some of these. And then the second part of that question is, in terms of liability, how do you protect yourself?
Well, for me, I would usually work it out directly with the company. Right. If I have a company who's me, like in a company's like, you have to have $10 to $15 million of liability insurance, that you have to have a bond for and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, yeah, thank you very much. We don't want to do business together, because why are you so fearful for me to have a $10 or $50 million bond when you're asking me my opinion based on the information that I see? So that's one thing that I personally watch out. If you're going to look at that, then you really need to go ahead and join a partnership or something like those lines on your professional liability. But what I do is I work out contracts where, you're going to do me as a direct staff augmentation directly with you. And so that liability is on you, not on liability on me. Obviously, I'm a CISSP and CRISC and all that kind of stuff. I have a code of ethics to deliver things in a quality manner. So I will do that. So there's a couple of things that I watch out for along those lines. But when you talk about how to find out about companies, stalk them, look in the news, X company lawsuit, X class action. I look to see how many of the executives are flipping. I look to see how many CISO CIOs I've had. If someone says, well, we had a CIO who came, or CISO who came, and 15 months, they were there, they spun out. 6 months comes by, we grab another one, 15 months spins out. 6 months go by, a new one comes in, spins out. Warning. One, why are these top CISOs keep spinning out? They have a reason why they keep spinning out. And two, who do you think in your firm for those 6 months is more qualified to do that? Legal? CFO? I've had people who've done that. Like their chief legal counsel becomes CISO for 6 months. Why would you ever think that that's good? Or, we just rolled under the CTO or CIO. There's a conflict of interest there. So obviously you're not putting security and all that stuff thinking as highly as you should for it. So there's some warning signs you look at that. I do look at Glassdoor and Indeed and stuff like that and see what people are saying. And if I still haven't been sure what I personally done, I've gone on LinkedIn and I said, hey, these people, they spun out of that company and they're in top leadership roles in 3 months. I'll ping them on LinkedIn and go, I know you have a place, but, was there an internal reason on why you chose to leave that company in 3 months? I'm asking, could you just at least say yay or nay to that? So I do it that way. I am careful about NDAs in place and stuff like that, where people aren't talking, getting themselves in trouble. But for professional, would you recommend me pursue this? And you can give your opinion as and I've done it before, as a professional, heck to the no, I would run away as quickly as you can and never go near that company.
It's so interesting. Was there a time where, your gut feel said no and you decided to take it anyway? And kind of like this whole thing blew up?
Yeah, I just actually spun out of one that from the first meeting, it was like, don't do that. Yeah. And then I'm like, and I'm thinking about all these reasons on why the meeting should have went the way it did and how their attitudes and stuff like that. And so I kept justifying for them. And then they weren't very proactive in answering emails and stuff like that. And I'm like, oh, they're probably this, probably that, blah, 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 blah. And then I was getting to the point to sign the engagement. And then I'm like, you would tell anybody that you mentor, run away. And you shouldn't have wasted these 3 months. And it was actually talking to my mentor because I'm like, this is really struggling. I'm like, why is it even struggle? Because you would have told anybody else from that first instance, they're not worth your time and effort. So, and it's true. I tell people, go with your gut. If you have that warning sign, go away. There's another company out there that needs your time. And because of spending time with that company, I actually did not go with the company I really should have gone for that.
Yeah, it's
effort.
Opportunity cost, basically.
Yeah, and it's okay. It's life lessons learned, right? I just posted on LinkedIn too. Lessons are lessons to bring you to a better thing. Again, it was a shorter period of time. I didn't spend a year, didn't spend 9 months. It was 3 months. But differing back and forth yourself to justify constantly, is this business going to be good? Can I help them? They need to be able to add value to you as you add value to them. And if they're not going to add value to you as a person, it's okay to walk away.
Mm-hmm. Super interesting. What about you being almost an outsider as almost like a scapegoat for something to happen? So, it's one thing to be a full-time you probably have a reaction to that, but do you find that that's sometimes something you have to be concerned?
Yeah, I have left full-time employees full-time employment because of them not doing the right thing. And then finding out legal issues they had and stuff like that wasn't disclosed about me when I was hired, and where it was setting me up to, in my opinion, to be the chief scapegoat officer. And And so, yeah, I've spun out of those. And when I've talked to other leaders out there, we've done the same thing. It's interesting when you do speak to people who are top in our field. I tell people a lot of times when you see that we've spun out in 15 months or 18 months, a lot of times it's that situation. Either they promised us a lot of stuff they're not delivering on, or they're not doing the right thing and they refuse to do the right thing. And then remember, as CISOs, we can do federal time. We can have federal fines and civil actions against us personally. I would tell you, no company is worth me spending prison time for.
Yeah, well, I don't think anything's worth spending prison time for. So that's super interesting. And from your perspective, you mentioned a lot when you're talking to peers that are have similar roles. How is that done? What that grapevine looks like this day and age, where there's less conferences, there's less. You mentioned reaching out to LinkedIn and so on. Do you proactively seek conversations with peers on a regular basis? How do you keep abreast of what's happening in the industry as a CISO today?
Well, one, I have mentors who I deal with and mentors who mentor me. So if you're not mentored, you should be mentored. Life's a learning journey. And how do you do that? Is you just reach out to somebody. But I always tell people, if I'm mentoring you, you should be mentoring and be there for someone else. Or at least encourage them to do that. I think pay it forward is important. I'm on a lot of advisory boards. So there's a lot of top-notch, CIOs, CTOs that I'm around consistently. And there is we have NDAs in place. If it's not formal in the advisory board, then it's formal in our head that we can talk to each other and support each other, and we don't talk out of school. That's why you'll never hear me speak a name or anything else unless maybe someone's on my podcast or something like that, and that's what they said, and so I can quote them. So that's the other thing is there's no gossip lines on there for that. When you talk about keeping abreast and stuff, I'm on the advisory board hash table for CyberWire. I think CyberWire is excellent source. Mm-hmm. I think the IAPP is excellent source for privacy news. I do HealthNet. I do a lot of newsletters and stuff like that I get every single day. And then, I have my own Google bots that I go ahead and I search for privacy and compliance and stuff along those lines. I think one of the things is because there's so much news out there anymore, is how do you go ahead and put it in bite size so you can see what's important and not important to you? Because you could spend 8 hours or 12 hours a day reading, but you got to get work done as well too. So I think that's one of the things that's important for you too, is even though you get these news feeds in, and I ask people all the time, and I get government sector and IT, healthcare as well too. But I tell people, I said, you get them in, but how quickly are you efficiently reading through them to see if there is a headline that's going to be pertinent for you for that day? So that's one of the things I think challenges people. It's not just getting a newsletter. It's reading the newsletter, reading the headlines, and then going ahead and seeing, hey, that's a piece of information that's important to you, like my LinkedIn profile for today. Upload, I thought was really interesting article on cybersecurity insurance, because cybersecurity insurance has gone up so far. In some areas, it's gone up to 150%. And I was just talking to an advisory board of this yesterday. We were just hashing this out. Or do you just go ahead and you hire more lawyers? What do you do? Because sometimes more lawyers is cheaper. And then if you're going to hire lawyers, do you hire them internally or really external? To you, do you actually do this work? And so I actually posted a pretty great article today on my LinkedIn on that. You guys can go check it out. Even if wherever this is posted, just Google stalk me and you can go find it. But those are the type of questions I think that are kind of interesting about which way should you go with strategy, just as with cybercrime has gone up so much in ransomware. It's just an example.
Yeah. And Dr. Wynn, it's every time, this is why I love talking to you, because my brain goes every time you mention, and it's so easy to get to the next question and dive a little deeper. So let's talk a bit about compliance. So maybe actually before we jump into compliance, I'd love to talk about why you mentioned cyber insurance. So that's a great topic. Mm-hmm. Let's cover that for a bit. So we've seen so cyber insurance has been around for a long time, right? But we've seen changes in the sense that cyber insurance companies are now starting to push back on what they cover, how they cover, and then also paying, doing these payouts, especially I think due to the increase in number of ransomware. So maybe, because you have such experience, maybe talk to us a bit about the kind of the lay of the land in terms of what is the current situation for cyber insurance and companies, and what is this? What was the status quo, and where are things going?
Yeah, I mean it's great. If people don't know, my first career was insurance. I sold for Northwestern Mutual. I sold for Mutual of Omaha. I was number one agent for a while. Just wasn't my love. And that's why I tell people it's okay to move into other areas that are better loved. But I actually was an agent for a very long period of time and was number one in the nation. So just give people that background a little bit on that. So one of the things interesting about cyber insurance, remember, insurance companies are in business to make money, right? They got to pay their staff and things along those lines. So it's not like, hey, we just like to you give us $1 and we constantly pay out $100 and that's a great business model for us. No one can stay in business that way. So let's put that in context that way. When it first came about as part of like general liability insurance, then you saw some of them we could have writers on there where you could go ahead and say, this is more pertinent to what's handling for us. But as we've seen, especially since 2020, really a little bit before that, where we had so many people remote, you end up taking a lot more risk, right? You have a lot more, you don't have things in a confined building. And then I would say you have IoT, you have 5G and stuff like that, which makes certain attacks a lot easier. If you're not freaked out about Norton 360 and some of these other antivirus that now can use your systems as cryptocurrency machines and stuff like that, you should. For businesses, it should freak you out too. But anyway, we have all these other avenues that can come in and tackle this in a variety of different ways that we really didn't have before. We had them, but they weren't to the level that they are now. So now when we go ahead and we talk about who's then at fault, who should really pay, that's where the nitty gritty is. If I'm not doing the best to have security by design, privacy by design, compliance by design, and I get breached, who really should be on the hook to go ahead and have those losses? The insurance company or us? So one of the things is, like, I was just consulting with a company yesterday, looking through their cyber insurance and helping them. What you're doing is you're actually having insurance companies along those lines who are actually doing assessments of the company and like, I don't think that you should have this gateway open. You need to go ahead and close that gateway because we don't find it secure, and we're not going to give you cyber insurance unless you close that, unless you do
so
redirects.
Do they have the expertise, Dr. Wynn? Do they have the expertise to actually? So they're employing.
They're important. Yep, they're really going out there and having their own vendor management security teams. A lot of bigger ones now looking at that and looking at full assessments and scanning systems and stuff like that to go ahead and get them insured. And you need to correct that if you want to go ahead and you want us to be able to cover this for your cyber liability insurance.
Do they do like a pen testing or anything like ethical hacking or anything like that? How do they evaluate the security posture for a company?
Independent third-party assessments, allowing them to scan, like, for example, your web-facing servers, for example. They might go ahead and have, there's companies out there that can do that very easily as well, too, for them and give them a readout. But yeah, so they can see what ports, protocol, and services to a degree are open. For example, on your external, being able possibly to get an internal. And then what they do is they look at your let's look at your architecture, let's look at the connections. And then I was helping this company actually refute some of those findings because they weren't showing what is the defense in depth and the mitigations that we have, what access controls and to your architectures in place to, yes, what you flagged is true if we didn't close any of the other possible doors. But that's the one thing you always have to, in any audit, be able to go ahead and say, I hear you. Yeah, that's true. However, here's all the mitigations in place that will make the possibility, 0 to none. And so you always have to be able to have educated people be able to spout that back. And so I tell people they're not trying to be mean. People always say they're trying to be mean. I would rather them tell me so that I go, holy crap, Batman, is it a real issue? Or should I go ahead and make sure I relook at my architecture and how we are protecting this very mindfully? I tell people they're trying to help you as well too, because I would rather them flag something and me fix it and not get attacked than find out after the fact. That's in any auditors. Auditors I tell people, again, I'm an auditor myself. I'm an auditor's your friend. They're not your enemy.
So do they look at a technology stack and say, okay, they have a preference for certain type of products, maybe type of firewalls, type of endpoint security, and so on. Is that also part of the kind of the total evaluation of the company? Yeah,
let's, for example, you have, gateway open and you are dealing with a gateway. And so you're dealing with, RDP for some reason has to be open to deal with that vendor. And then maybe, so maybe you're using port 3389, stuff like that. And then they might come back and say, hey, you should be over secure port. You should be over 443. I think that's a little bit of architecture change. But you could always go ahead too and say, hey, how are we doing this mindfully, right? Does it basically go into, a redirect scenario? A lot of times people say, well, why aren't you using multi-factor authentication for that? Allowing I'll give you some vendors out there. Why aren't you using like Octo or dual security, something like that, for that RDP to go to them, two-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication, and then redirect into you after you're authenticated that was the person on the other side. So there's always good ways to do that. And they might say dual, but there's a plethora of other ones, manage engine, all this stuff. There's a plethora of ways for you to be able, vendors to do that. But they're just giving you another suggestion. There's other ways to handle that as well too, authentication yourself. But they're just saying, hey, we see that you're using 3389 for this gateway. What's the reasoning behind it? And then how are you protecting that? And then, so it's that further conversation.
Now, do they offer a discount? So for example,
no business or no business.
So that's it. But what, for example, when you insure a car, there's some security features, for example, anti-theft or whatever. So you get like a, discount on the premium. Is there anything like that in cyber insurance where they say, okay, you have these security controls, this security posture, you don't have history of vulnerability, breach, and so on. So we'll give you a better premium overall. Is that something that's done or no?
Well, these are baseline requirements if we're even going to consider you for business. So that's the one, right? It's the same thing when you're looking at the car insurances and stuff like that. Your car is X years old. We don't cover that line of business, right? You have to go to someone else who specializes in dealing with older cars. Mm-hmm. So they do the same thing with cyber. They're tiered, right? You want to go with the A carriers, B carriers, right? C carriers. But then what they also do is they do look at your losses, and you are going to pay a premium if you're going to get insurance from them because you're a higher risk. But they're also going to say that, you haven't insured up your security hygiene, and you have to prove that you can do that. I also see a trend where every quarter they're coming and having you revalidate that the security posture that you stated that you had upon signing is true, which I think is great.
Yeah. But every quarter, that's significant. That's not something that it's not like once a year. That's every quarter sounds like a very kind of rapid change from prior prior times. And how do they quantify what the premium is supposed to be like? How do they quantify the actual monetary risk associated? So, there's a whole actuary sciences where, you're a soccer player, if I want to insure my right leg, there's somebody out there that look at the tables and say, okay, how much is this person making? If they lose their capacity to play soccer for the next 3 weeks, they lose a contract. There's a value for that. But when we talk about cybersecurity, there are so many areas of impact to the business. They can range from, minor outage to a whole, catastrophe of the organization being down for several months. In your, opinion, how do insurance company quantify that risk today?
Well, they do, and I'm not an expert in it. They do look at what sector you're in. They look about how visible of a company that you are in. And they, as you said, actually, they look at the likelihood of attack and then the likelihood of repercussions of that attack. And then when you talk about other things, you also talk about, what are your deductibles going to be and what is the level of coverage? You always work that in too. And I tell people what dictates a lot of that for you as a company as well, besides on how much risk you personally can handle. For example, can I handle $1 million loss? Can I handle being offline for 4? There's some companies out there that could be offline for 4 days and it's not going to really affect their bottom line that much. But someone else who is an e-commerce company, maybe they can put them out of business doing that. So they look at those factors as well too. Again, there are all those tables to go ahead and determine what those premiums are going to
be. And what about paying ransomware? For example, because that's an area where it's a gray area. Is there a clause saying we're going to be paying up to this amount, to get the data back? I mean, there's a whole area that's kind of gray area, especially when some of the government entities are recommending not to pay the ransomware because that encourages additional attack afterwards.
Yeah, I dealt with 4 companies, especially who all come in after been attacked with ransomware. And I'll tell you, every one of them paid the ransom. I wish they didn't, but again, from a business perspective, you're bricked, and how much time can you effectively be bricked? They did go ahead and they had backups and stuff like that, but again, they had critical clients, a couple of them, and so they had to go ahead and pay to get the information sooner. So it's one of those bugaboos. But when you talk about part of the things you see in contracts on, if I had a big deductible, for example, can I pay that ransomware because maybe that ransomware, whatever it was, X dollars is underneath that deductible I had with you. Do I have to disclose? And so what you're seeing in the contracts is that whether it was under your deductible or not, you have to go ahead and tell us that you paid that. You have to tell us that you even were threatened. So you see that too. There's a couple of new ones I've seen too, and I've been reviewing here lately, and talking about the last 2 months, is if there is even a perceived attack, you have to tell us. And so I've always reached back to the companies and dealt with them like, what does that mean?
Right.
You have somebody enumerating your reports your reports on your firewall that you're like, ping, 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 boom, I shut down that IP. Does that mean I have to disclose that to you? Because if you're going to do that, you'd be doing that all day long.
Yeah. Where is the threshold of what is defined as an attack? Because it can be like just port scanning that bot does it on a regular basis. Is that considered an attack, or that's very different from a, state actor, specifically, trying to get in for the past 6 months. It's a very, very different type of, now what about supply chain risk? How do an insurance company quantify that? Because that's a whole can of worm, and you have some opinions about that, like whether supply chain, is being handled properly with these companies, and how did the insurance company review that risk associated with that?
Well, one, they always ask you to at least the ones I've been in, who is your critical vendor list? And that's one thing that's interesting when I deal with companies. I'm like, who are your critical vendors? And she's like,
hold on. That's something that someone should be answering right away. I mean, that should not be a question that there's a pause there. People should they should have like the list of 10 critical vendors, right? Or no?
You would think so, but if you think about how many, but again, if I'm going to be devil's advocate,
yeah.
I don't like the devil. If I go ahead and if I did it from a security or IT perspective, I'm going to be missing something, because who really is the critical? When I talk to the finance company, the finance department, who really are their critical vendors might not be who I think they're critical. I might think it's Microsoft, because we're going to do email and all that kind of stuff, but that's really for the general. But then maybe they're going to say no, who I do accounting with and all that kind of stuff. So I think part of it is us not saying per department, or even if you say these are our top 10 departments, really going ahead and say, okay, if we have business continuity, it should always come back to business continuity. So I'm big in business continuity and enterprise risk management. What vendors would we be hosed if they went down and we had no communication, or we could not use them? That's how I phrase that when I go into those meetings with them. And then I would tell you, if your eyes aren't wide open, it should be wide open, because it's going to be way different than you thought it was going to be. And because at times it might, for developer, maybe it's GitHub, and maybe you don't, and you're like, but I don't have that on my finance roles. I don't pay anything. But if you lose that connection to GitHub, maybe developers are we're really hosed.
That's a critical point, where the value of the contract does not necessarily reflect the risk associated with that vendor. So how does the insurance company, how do they monitor that? How would they evaluate a third-party risk program? Is this something they even do when they assess a risk for a company? Do they ask to review that? Because again, it's the attack surface. If you talk about the attack surface, it's more than the company assets. It's the vendor's assets and the vendors in the nth, the third party and the nth party, right? So it's how do they assess that at all?
Yeah, I've only had them ask me who are who do you use for your servers? Who do you use for Windows, stuff like that? From a top layer, making sure that you're not I'm using freebie XYZ, freebie ABC, freebie this, freebie this, freebie that, to get an idea that you are using companies who try to build in security and privacy by design, right? That you're using Microsoft, you're using Apple, that you're using some of the bigger people, right? You're using Palo Alto, you're using Cisco. I'm just naming some people off the top of the head. There's a plethora of people out there, CrowdStrike, Zscaler, that you are trying to partner with people who do take security and privacy and compliance seriously. So they are being a bit of a hedge on your risk versus, I use no name this, no name that. So from that perspective, but to sit there, I would tell you when you ask for IT asset management, software asset management, what protocol services are really open around your network, most people go, I hope I know. It's just, it's so easy for people out there to connect in other SaaS products without, I know we call it shadow IT quite a bit. And it's not even on the IT department. A lot of times the IT department is shock and awed as much as the CISO is about who's doing what. And I'll give you an example was the SolarWinds. I was talking to the company at SolarWinds, and so I'm looking at the registry of software that's on systems, right? Look at your SIM and stuff like that. Don't see SolarWinds. Talk to the CIO. Nope, we don't got it. Talk to the CTO. Don't got it. Talk to finance. We had a contract 10 years ago that we bought the product once. No, it ended up being that developers were using it through GitHub because they connect that way. And so when you talk about, you have people coming in, do you use SolarWinds at all? You said no, because you internally didn't, but they were connecting it in their way. It still was not part of the attack vector because they were isolated off and they had no outbound connections through the firewall and all that kind of stuff. And it couldn't cross, segments and VLAN. So it was isolated. And then, luckily for them, they're using a really old version that wasn't patched. So they were really good. Having poor patch management actually was their savior as well, too. But that was another case in point where we're like going, it's tough to realize every single possible thing that can run your network, especially when, we talk about privilege level access, admin access, and everything is still running rampant. And it's been a problem since at least 1995, and it's still a problem today, is access control and knowing what's traversing northwest and east-west through your
dynamic. It's an environment is so dynamic now. Companies spin off cloud services left, right, and center. They forget to close it down. They there's a lot of misconfigured services and so on. And then a lot of times it's just even through merger and acquisition. You get a company that you don't even know what assets they have until after the fact. And there's a lot of that going on. Definitely visibility. Dr. Wynn, I feel like we need another, I haven't even started covering all the questions I even I was planning to ask to begin with. But this has been a real pleasure. So why don't we do this? We'll table this discussion. And then we'll do a third one. We'll cover some more topics. But for the folks that want to reach out to you for whatever reason, either for consulting, for mentorship, just advice, maybe some questions in regards to what we discussed today, what's the easiest way?
Always easiest to get me through LinkedIn.
Okay, super. And then you mentioned your website as well, right? drRebeccaWynn.com?
Correct.
Okay, perfect. So for all those who joined today, thank you very much. Looking forward to seeing you all the next session. And until then, be safe. Thanks for Dr. Rebecca Wynn for joining today. Much, much appreciated. It was a really engaging conversation. Thank you again.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Always with you guys.
Thank you.